Now, Melbourne in Australia is back in lockdown because of a spike in COVID cases. In the past 24 hours, it's recorded almost 200 cases. That's its highest recorded daily total. So, as a consequence, for the next 6 weeks, the 5 million people who live in Melbourne can only leave their homes for essential purposes. That means work, school, food shopping and caregiving. Here's Victoria's State Premier on the decision.
Stay at home means just that. Not stay at your holiday home, not stay at your second home. Your principal place of residence is where you must be, except for the 4 reasons to leave your home. This is, I know, further than we went last time, but we are in many respects in a more precarious, challenging and potentially tragic position now than we were some months ago.
Now, let me show you this video from just before the lockdown came into effect. This was just before midnight in Melbourne. There was a huge queue at this Costco supermarket as people tried to stock up on supplies. There are also stricter rules for localised outbreaks within Melbourne. For example, this apartment block is one of 9 where residents are banned from leaving. One health official justified the move, calling the building a vertical cruise ship, but residents say they weren't given any notice before the lockdown came into effect and have been struggling to get food delivered. Here's one woman describing her experience.
A lot of people are saying, oh, come on, how did you not have anything, in your pantries and this and that? Let's not forget, the people living in these towers are vulnerable. We are, some of us live paycheck to paycheck, so we can't go out and do a massive shop or stock up on pantry items like everyone else can. So, it's not really for anyone to judge, our shopping schedule, for example. So if we're being locked down, our human rights our basic human rights are being stripped from us. The least they could have done is done this in a more organised manner. It's not acceptable for children and babies to be waiting 48 hours to get some, bread, milk, nappies, formula, things that they need. That it was just terrible. And the police don't have the skills to be dealing with this situation. And I totally believe that this is classism. It's veiled as public health because we're talking about the most marginalised members of our society having their basic human rights stripped. It's absolutely classist. And I'll give you an example. I absolutely cannot believe that Premier Andrews would lock down a multi-million-dollar skyrise, for example, in South Bank or just across the street in Travancore and treat those residents the exact same way. He would not do it.
Now, this lockdown only affects Melbourne and one other area, but the whole of Victoria has been sealed off from its neighbours. Its border with New South Wales is shut for the first time since the Spanish flu. That's over 100 years ago. That means 55 ground crossings, 4 major highways, 33 bridges and 2 waterways are all now being monitored by police, troops and drones. South Australia has also closed its border. Only those deemed essential workers are now being allowed to come in from Victoria, and if they do, they'll have to quarantine for 14 days. Now, the context here is that Australia's done relatively well in restricting the virus. It has just over 8,500 cases and 106 people have died. And almost all of its new cases are in Victoria. You can see from this graph that new cases are accelerating and are past their previous peak in March. Also a concern is that 90% of cases are coming from within the community. Initially, most cases in Australia were from travellers arriving from overseas. That's changing, and it's thought the surge in cases is more likely to be connected to breaches of hotel quarantines. One important detail here is that more than 20,000 people have gone through a 14-day isolation in hotels in Victoria after arriving in the state. This was one of the hotels in question. One investigation points to the virus spreading from security guards working at them to their families. We've seen several international reports like this one in the Times of London suggesting some security contractors were having sex with guests and that families were allowed to go between rooms, though we're not able to confirm those claims. Other experts argue that Covid-19 was already in the community. We've talked before about how meat processing plants have been infection hotspots elsewhere in the world. Well, here's a Guardian report saying this abattoir in West Melbourne was linked to more than 100 cases, and that was, well, back in May. Whatever the reasons, case numbers are definitely going up, and so is the pressure on the state governments. This ABC article is scathing. It says, unlike other political scandals, the failures of quarantine are directly affecting hundreds of thousands of people, more than 310,000 to be precise. So, a pressing situation in Victoria.